This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on deindustrialization and economic development. Today I'm speaking with my colleague and friend, Tom Kinghorn, Vice President for Business Affairs at Ball State University. The date is February 6th, 2008. Tom, I want to begin by thanking you for your willingness to participate in our project. And I'd like to begin with a kind of general question, and that is to ask you, what has been your involvement in Muncie economic development? How long you've been involved with it? I assume that primarily you were probably representing Ball State on various committees and councils and horizons and visions and things like that. So I'd like you to give me a little kind of historical narrative as to your involvement in Muncie economic development over time.
I guess my involvement as a bit player in all this goes back to about 1980.
Okay.
And I served on the board of the Chamber of Commerce at a time when, for instance, the executive, I happened to be chairman of the board at the time that the Charles Stroh, who was then the executive,
Right.
decided he resigned and decided to do something else, retire. And so I was responsible for recruiting a successor to Mr. Stroh, and so that was kind of an interesting break point from what had been going on before to
Right.
A new individual that we brought to town that had much different ideas.
Okay.
He was from LaPorte, Indiana, and had been very successful there, and so he kind of brought a new look and a new approach, far more aggressive approach than this community had witnessed before.
Okay.
And so then in addition to that, I served on the Delaware Advancement Corporation for several years, and then so at that time we were just getting ready to do Vision 2000 or
Horizon?
Horizon
91. Okay.
Right. And then so I served on various of those kinds of boards for a while. Then I got involved again in 2000, I guess about 2001, as the 2006 Economic Development Initiative.
That's the Vision 2006?
Vision
Okay.
2006.
Okay.
And
And now you're involved in 2011.
Right. Well, actually, not very much involved
Okay.
in 2011, but from the university standpoint, the kinds of things that we started in 2001 are still moving forward at this point.
Okay.
So, and will be for years.
Go back to Horizon 91. As you reflect back on that, and I know, memory isn't always perfect, but I'm trying to get some opinions of what the major goals were of Horizon 91. So when you think back at that point in time where Muncie's concerned about trying to diversify its economy, what did you and the other people who were involved in Horizon 91, what did you set out to accomplish?
Well, in fact, I'm going to, after we get finished here, next several days, I think I can find those
Okay.
materials.
Okay.
And if I can, I
Yeah.
believe that the key metric was a forecast of the jobs that would be created by this mechanism.
Okay.
You might ask, what kind of jobs?
Yeah.
That's really a critical question.
Right, right.
And I think I'd have to report to you that even at that time, we were hoping to attract more manufacturing. I remember, for instance, going to Michigan with a group.
Mm-hmm.
We were visiting companies in Michigan that day. Actually, it was a joint project of people from the chamber in Muncie and Anderson, and we were visiting companies that were supplier-type companies to major manufacturers, trying to talk them into coming to Muncie.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, there's
Yeah.
a specific
Yeah.
exercise that we planned and executed, going a little more than door to door, but
Mhm.
We had some introductions made to those companies and tried to attract them here. So, and for instance, there are some whose names escape me right now, but with a little bit of working on it, I can identify some of those companies that actually did come here. But had we turned the corner in knowing that the manufacturing was no longer going to be part of our future? I don't think so.
Okay. When do you think that great dawning occurs with people involved in economic development in Muncie?
I think it began in, I would guess, the late 90s,
Okay.
mid to late 90s,
Right.
and it's still happening.
Okay.
I mean, these kinds of things. If you look at where we are right now, in order to have made a major intervention, you should have done it 30 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And when we look at this community 20 years from now, we'll all think that it was pretty easy.
Right.
But it will really be the result of seeds that have been sown today,
Mm-hmm.
in the last 5 years, probably 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because in everything I've witnessed, we could take Purdue has the #1 technology park in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and they are quick to tell everyone that.
Right.
But they started that park 20 years ago,
Yeah,
and have been
yeah.
working hard on it ever since,
Yeah.
and it is great. So those are the kinds of things that we have to
Okay.
look forward to and then look back on.
Can you see this change in the agenda, as you described it briefly, for Horizon 91 as it transitions to Vision 2006? That in 2000, if you look at the 2006 agenda, it's an entirely different agenda as far as the kind of jobs we're talking about.
Yes, I don't think there's any question about that.
Okay.
The 2006, which, was put together as an
Mhm.
initiative in
Right.
2000. Yes, I think there was clearly a recognition. So my estimate is that mid-late 90s, there was a realization that we had to make a shift. And in the plan for the 2006, which
Right.
happened in 2001,
Right.
clearly we were looking at those kinds of technology conversions that were not necessarily part of what we were doing in 1991.
Okay.
But I guess I'll go find you the goals
Sure.
and objectives, and we
Okay.
can examine that.
Well, when, in your role in doing these things, I'm making the assumption that you're doing this primarily as the university's representative?
That and a community citizen, like all
Okay.
the other people that serve in these
Okay.
things. So, it accrued to the benefit of not only the university, but to the community, so yes.
Well, the reason I ask is because I want to get a little bit of comment from you on how you see the role of the university over time as a player in all this. I mean, all of a sudden, well, let's make a point of contrast. I come to Muncie in the late 1960s, and the big automobile plants are the largest employers by far in town. Now we're having this conversation in your conference room where this university is by far the largest employer in the community. And you've watched that happen. And so as you've been involved in these initiatives, all of a sudden you're doing this as the university as part of this. Now the university is the largest employer in the community, which I think might put a little bit different cast on this.
Well, much different. If you go to Emmons Auditorium
Yeah.
and hang out in the front where all the plaques are.
Right, yeah.
In 1965 or 64, right in there. The Emmons Auditorium was the first community/university
Right.
initiative. Fundraising was a key part of it, but to build Emmons Auditorium, a community auditorium,
Right.
that word's pretty important.
Yeah, you're right.
But at that time, as the plaques revealed, we were certainly a bit player in the community leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the president wasn't respected and all of that, but when you looked at the drivers of our economy,
Mm-hmm.
they're all the names that you see over
Yeah.
there. And what's shocking about it is I was over there not 5 or 6 years ago, and I just was I was waiting for somebody, and I looked up, none of the companies
right.
that were major contributors to Emmons Auditorium are still here.
Yeah, they're gone, yeah.
And in a matter of a year or two, certainly none of them will be here. Others have come and gone, and so yes, I guess the leadership structure of the community at that time was vastly different than it is today. I remember when I became chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in 1983, 84 year. There was not a lot, but some to do about this is the first time a person from a university had ever led the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a big deal, I didn't think, but it was a big enough deal that some people commented.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have the history of the companies that have come and gone.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
And
right.
And
it's a rather lengthy list.
And the employment number right next to it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about thousands
Yeah, you
and
are.
thousands
Yep.
of these high-paying jobs.
Yep, exactly.
And you need only drive around the community to see the shell of too many of those plants.
Yeah. Outside of Horizon 91 and the Vision programs, I'd like you to comment on other specific projects that you might have been involved with on behalf of the university. I mean, I think of a lot of the things in your area of expertise that certainly during the 15 years that I was provost that you would get called on or President Worthen would assign you to do. So I don't want to limit this completely just to these big grand scenario plans like Horizon 91 and the two Vision programs.
Well, when it came time for representation, I guess since I had been involved in so many of these projects over the years representing the university, it became kind of natural. The Vision 2006 program, which was, we were putting the program together in 2000, really required the active involvement of the university.
Okay.
And I think by that time everyone had realized that the university's role had to be far more major. In other words, they were more dependent on the university, and so that became a much stronger role, I guess, than in the past. We created at the time the Community Technology Initiative that involved hundreds of people. We raised money for the Vision 2006 program, largely on the basis of converting our economy, and began that process. So with their contributions, corporate citizens voted in favor of that concept because it was certainly a 21st century type concept. And it's still underway, and it'll be a while before we'll be claiming victory.
Yeah, I was going to say that the victory claim is still out on the horizon someplace.
Well, you know from your experience how many faculty they are the result of their training. And their training is to do research, and I mean their PhD program has a discipline around it that's very important, but it does not include commercializing their idea. And that's the way it is here, it's the way it is at Purdue, it's the way but that's changing too across the country. So
well, when do you begin to get some feeling that as the university changed and became more, shall we say, high-tech oriented, that the expertise that we had on our campus was of greater value to Muncie, as Muncie became obviously much more aware that these manufacturing jobs weren't the key, that the general area of high-tech might be more important to the community's future?
Well, you'll recall that the university started on a direction ahead of other universities in 1984.
Right.
John Worthen was a major driver, and the reason why in 2005 or 6 that we were the most wired campus in the country goes right back to the roots that were planted in 1984. And so somewhere in that continuum is when it became realized that at the same time that the industrial might of the community was going down, the university was still growing, and I think that there was more note about what was happening here. I think when the Lilly Endowment
Yeah, right.
gave its first
Right.
$20,000, that was certainly a validation
Mhm.
and a recognition, and gave us the capability to invest at levels we never would have been able
Yeah.
to do before.
Yeah.
So I think that is a watershed event
Okay.
in the evolution.
Yeah, it's funny, you look back now on the original AT&T deal that we did, with all that fiber optic, which I have to confess, I look back, a lot of us thought that was a little bit on the loony side when we first proposed it.
But, that wouldn't happen had we not planned the building.
Right.
And when we planned the building
Yeah.
in 1983 or 84, something
Yeah.
like that, that's when we decided a master's program in
Mhm.
information and
Right,
communication
right.
science was necessary.
Yep, I agree.
And then that's the same time that we hired Ray Steele.
Yeah, right.
And Timkoff was,
Yeah, that's right.
that was one of his creations.
I've heard Temcoff for a couple of years.
And Ray did a good job of,
Yeah.
of calling attention
Yeah.
to this particular
Yep.
tool.
Yeah,
And if it hadn't been for the building, actually,
yeah,
Steve Bell plays a role
Yep.
in this. Because
No-
it
no
was the
question.
building, it
Yeah.
was CICS, it was bringing him to town, and that drew attention to what we were doing.
Yep.
He was able to
he put a
help
face.
attract some other people.
He put a face on it.
He sure did.
Yeah, I mean, a face that was nationally, indeed internationally recognized. That's a very good observation.
And then, that was mostly telecommunications at the
Mhm.
time.
Right.
And, as the communications industry has evolved, so did we.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that broadened into the program. Now we think
Mhm.
of telecommunications in much different terms than we did at the
Yeah.
time.
You've touched on this, but I want to go back maybe a decade or two and ask you to reflect on, I guess what I would call the community's changing view of the role of the university in working in partnership with the community, because I kind of get the feeling in talking to some of the people I've spoken with already that there's a whole different view of how important Ball State is to the future of the larger Muncie community. And I think,
Now or then?
well, I think my view is that back in the 80s it was taken for granted by a lot of people, and now I think more people see it as absolutely critical to anything that's going to happen as far as the future of this community.
Well, I think that's true. But if you go back to the late 70s,
Okay.
early 80s, if that's the time span you're thinking about.
Yeah.
If you were an individual who was putting together the business leadership for this community,
Mhm.
your list would have included a whole lot of people before you would have said, oh yes, and maybe we ought to have John Emmons involved.
That's my point. Yeah.
Because we were not.
Right.
I mean, we were, some people called us that college.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
People that go back even
Yeah,
further.
yeah.
And those were a lot of the people who were populating
No, you're
those
right.
decisions
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
Certainly, Alec Bracken and his involvement and leadership as an industrialist.
Yeah.
And at the university was a big bridge.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
And probably the biggest bridge, because he was almost one of the founders.
Yeah. Right.
And he also was an industrial titan.
Yep.
So actually, while I wasn't there,
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that one part of the Ball family had the hospital
Right,
responsibility,
yeah.
the other one had the university responsibility, and it would have been a guy like Alec who would have said, let's add John Emmons or John
Mhm.
Bruce into
Right.
this discussion. But it wouldn't have,
Yeah.
that wouldn't have come first. It would
Right.
have been the Brodericks, it would have been the Borg Warners, it would have
Right.
been the Ball Corporations, it would have
Yeah.
been all that long list of people that I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
And,
No, I would certainly agree with you.
and I guess the other thing is, we were so heavily a manufacturing town.
Mhm.
This was not we were a big manufacturing
Mhm.
town for our size population.
Mhm.
And if you were going to get your buddies together, you wouldn't have necessarily thought about the educational institution
Mhm.
doing good work,
Right.
important to the community,
Right.
but, you know.
Yeah. Not to the extent that it's important now, however.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and besides, at the time, remember, in 1980, this operation wasn't near the scale it is right now.
No, it's true. Yeah.
I mean, I can remember, some of our appropriation figures back in those years, and they are, I mean, you wouldn't believe the difference
I
in
know.
appropriation. So,
Yeah.
As we have grown and diversified,
Yeah.
remember, back in 1965 became a university,
Mhm.
and it was, when did we really become a university
Right.
as far as curricular plan and diversification of our population? Didn't that take 15 years, 10 years?
It's funny because it butts up against the same thing we're talking about with the development of Horizon 91, because it's really in the late 70s, early 80s when we begin to make that transition from what someone once said to me, when did you become a university in something other than letterhead? And I think that's
For sure.
that's
I mean,
exactly the point.
That's the way,
Yeah.
it's all those things. But remember, as our curriculum matured,
Yeah.
we had something more, and this was more than just a perception, but the perception was we had a lot to offer if you want to talk about teacher education.
Right.
But
Right.
if you wanted to talk about business,
Yeah. Right.
we weren't there yet.
No.
But things are all different now.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of what we have to offer
Yeah.
as a part of the breadth of our curriculum today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a whole
That-
different.
that
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah. It's a whole different curricular structure.
Yeah.
A more specific question, and you can add more to my number, but it's just one I picked out of the air. What do you think are the three most important things that Muncie has to address in its efforts to foster and develop economically? I mean, you could mention 10, but I've been asking people to mention 3. Yeah, any 3 that might occur to you. And we're talking about 2008 now. I don't want you to go back here. I want you to say, okay, here's where we are. We're in 2008, and perhaps looking at this as much from a university perspective as anything else, what are the 3 most important things that Muncie really has to do to foster greater economic development?
My number one is we have to realize that just having a job available for someone will not draw the kind of talent we need to this town.
Okay.
We need to recruit people to come to town with the whole array, the quality of life factors have to be there. It's more than just a job.
Okay.
In the industrial age, if you had a job available, you could talk to a few people and from areas, Tennessee and others, that the
Mhm.
history of this, the community would reveal. You could get people to come there. This is the same thing that's happened up in northern Indiana, for instance. The small industrial places there, if they need 10 more employees, they put out the word and they come. That's not the way it's going to be for the future. The future is going to belong to the community that makes itself so attractive that people want to come there.
Okay.
And that's going to be a major mind shift for this community, because we never really had to think about it that way.
Okay, that's one. What about the university and its programs? I mean, does that occur to you at all as far as
Yeah.
diversification of different kinds of academic offerings?
It does. There are people, for instance, who would say, if we only had an engineering school.
Yeah, right.
But we don't, and we're not going
Right,
to.
right.
But we are very strong in a number of technological areas
Mhm.
that give us an edge nobody else has.
Right.
So, every community has to build on its strengths and not, wish you had strengths that you didn't, that you can't build.
Right.
Especially when we do have lots of strengths here.
Mhm.
But yes, I think there's no question about it. If we were, from an institutional standpoint, like we were in 1975,
Mhm.
we would have a lot bigger job to do than what we have now,
Right.
because of the strength of our curriculum. We
Right.
have, let's look at them. We're more entrepreneurial even in education than we ever
Yep.
were before.
Yeah.
And there are technology transfer
Mhm.
and company development ideas even out of Teachers College, which would be a surprise to some people, but not to, that's a real credit to our program.
Yeah, yeah.
Certainly, what we know about entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
we are a national leader in
Mhm.
entrepreneurship. What we know and is emerging in digital media is,
Mhm.
and the folks who are expert at this say that in 2009, when all of our televisions turn to digital,
Yeah.
it will
Yeah.
be it will be more major than just trying to find out how you get your TV to work.
Mhm.
It's my understanding that every TV is now a computer.
Yeah, yeah, the new ones.
And,
Yeah,
well, I mean,
the
it will
HDs.
be like your
Yeah.
computer.
Yeah.
And there will be products that will be developed by somebody
Mhm.
that will change the way we live.
Mhm.
And there's no reason to think we couldn't be on the front end of all that. So
Okay.
those are
That's
just a couple
good.
of areas
Yeah.
that are areas of strength.
Yeah.
And we do research in the Human Performance Laboratory. When you think about the fact that some of the first guys to meet the astronauts when they come back from
Yeah.
space are Ball State
Yeah.
researchers.
That's right.
There are lots of ideas that have a
Mhm.
fairly heavy engineering and technological underpinning. Wellness
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
something that we're gonna have to get a grip on as a nation, and we know a lot about wellness.
I wonder when that was coming up. Yeah, right. Near and dear to your heart.
So, so there are a number of roles, but to think that we're gonna play this role automatically without some kind of intervention
Mhm.
that is gonna try to have folks who weren't trained to think this way become interested.
Mhm.
And it's no different than here. I have talked with my colleagues at other institutions who are doing
Yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah,
and
sure.
it's
Yeah.
I mean, as we become a greater research power, we will have more opportunities.
Let me shift that a little bit and have you reflect some on representing the university now and in your capacity as vice president, being on a lot of these different councils and committees and stuff. What obstacles have you encountered in representing the university in working on Muncie economic development? And this may have changed over time. I don't really know whether it's different, say now, than it might have been in 1985 or 1990 or something like that.
Well, I never thought about obstacles.
Okay.
At all. I mean, I was elected chairman of the chamber in
Right.
1983, so
Yeah.
must not have been.
So there's acceptance there.
I don't think there's a problem with that. Now,
Okay.
I think, as you said, there's, in some quarters in the community, a greater realization that, that we must play a role that maybe people didn't think we needed to play in 1980.
Okay.
But,
Okay. Again, another little bit of a shift. Think of, you want to take that call? Okay. I've sort of personalized this to recruiting. So think of trying to recruit staff in your area, although you can respond to the question in any way and from any perspective you wish. Do you think in 2008, Muncie is a hard or easy sell?
hard.
Okay, talk about that.
And, I can prove it.
Okay,
Now, it isn't just my staff, although, no, I'll take that back.
okay,
The number of people working at Ball State that don't live here is a number that would surprise lots of people.
not me. Because I think one of the things that us, did that assisted in that process was not just the appeal of living in places like the northern edge of Indianapolis, it's that we changed the calendar from quarters to semesters and set it up so that a faculty member could teach his classes on Tuesday and Thursday, or a faculty member could teach his classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I recall telling our esteemed friend and dear colleague, John Worthen, that if you change the calendar, where in the old days you had the quarter system and you pretty much had to be here 5 days a week, on semesters you don't have to do that. So that's one, I mean, I'm not saying that's the only reason why what you're going to describe has happened, but it certainly is something that contributed to that. That along with 332 and I-69.
Those no doubt help.
Yeah.
And the other thing is,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, this is certainly no science into this.
Right.
But, is it possible that we're attracting people who always drove an hour no matter where they were going to go? I mean, anyone coming from California or coming from Chicago or coming from those larger cities had to, so this is not a big deal to drive 45 minutes. Everybody does it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a whole lot different than people thought of before.
Well, there are so many angles to this, Tom. You've got spouse situations where I'm going to come to Ball State, but it's easier for us to live in Noblesville or to live in Fishers because my spouse is going to work in downtown Indianapolis or in Carmel or something like that. So I mean, you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right.
Lifestyles are different in places that are more attractive than Muncie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So your comment, I mean, to sort of sum this up, is that you feel that Muncie in 2008 is a harder sell than an easy sell as far as appealing to people to
you have
locate
to work
it.
on it.
Okay.
You really have to work on it. And that wouldn't just be me. I talked to lots of people who are in a position to think about their organization and how do they build their organization by attracting really top talent, and they're facing the same kinds of
Okay. What do you think are the things that might appeal to a business looking to come to Muncie, Indiana, right now?
Good schools.
Okay. Okay. I mean, you're talking about good schools across the board, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not picking out any
Yeah.
particular grade level or anything.
Well, you're talking about K-12 plus higher education plus.
Well, I'm not including higher education.
Oh, okay.
Because, I'm thinking about K-12. My assumption is if you want to go to higher education, you have this choice as Ball State, but you have all the choices. You have lots of choices in Indiana places. And you have Ivy Tech if that's what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a pretty wide range of opportunity, but I think the kind of people we're trying to attract to this institution are very concerned about the education of their kids.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would agree.
And they want to be assured that there's a first-rate education available for them here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's some doubt about that. Can't tell you, I'm not an analyst of educational achievement or anything, but there are some markers that we have out there that, I-step tests and those kinds of things.
Right.
And there are lots of explanations that communities have for the schools that don't seem to perform well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think blaming it on the schools is probably wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that if your community, through whatever process, I'm going to use the word degrade, I'm not sure that's
Right, yeah.
but moves to the place where those children that come to school have limitations, whatever they are,
Mm-hmm.
the school can't by magic fix that.
Okay.
So, but at the same time, I'm struck by a story I've told a number of times,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it has some applicability. There's a small town in southern Indiana, not far from Louisville, that decided when they got around their conference table and decided what the future of their economy was going to be and the economic development thrust, they decided they were going to be the bedroom community to Louisville. And they set about designing housing developments and so forth that would be, they thought, attractive to Kentuckians. And at some point in that process, they were confronted with the fact that the people in Louisville didn't think they had good schools. And they weren't about to move there no matter what the housing was like. And so they went through a a self-examination and decided that the people in Louisville must not be crazy people because they wanted them to come.
Mm-hmm.
They maybe ought to look inside themselves and try to reinvent themselves in that way. And I think that there's some message in that for every community that wants to attract high technology, high paying jobs. All these things require people who have educational background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's different than the industrial age in Muncie or anywhere else.
Do you think that Muncie right now could be described as a place with a conducive business climate?
Well, I mean, we have some things going for us. We have very reasonable housing.
Yeah.
That's a plus. We have, I guess I would say that the business climate here is very open.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I don't see impediments there.
Okay.
Indiana has been pretty pro-business with the kind of incentive programs that are available for a wide variety of purposes. I would think that we're about as open. I think that the key is you have to be in a position and think this through in a way that we're selling the community to other people and expecting that they're going to have high expectations of us.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's good. This is kind of a sidebar question, but I want to make sure I get it on the record. For a long time, as you're well aware, I'm talking now about the university, resisted having what I would call a Ball State University presence downtown. What's the change in just the last, I gather, months to get us downtown?
The resistance was we had to find something that made sense.
Okay, I remember those discussions. Okay, so now we have something that makes sense.
Well, we had Lilly money.
Right.
And the folks who were managing the Lilly program thought that a more urban location would benefit the program.
Okay.
And so I mean, it was no resistance other than
Right.
We are just a few blocks away and to offer classes there.
Yeah.
And we actually did some studies and remember.
I do.
So,
right.
So that was that. I mean, I guess.
Okay. When the chamber, and you could put the mayor's office and anybody else who might be a player in this, is trying to interest a prospective client in Muncie, what is the process whereby the university might get involved in helping to seal the deal, if you will, as far as getting that client to say, yeah, I want to come to Muncie, Indiana?
Well, I participated in a number of those.
Okay.
So the client, the prospect was in town, and normally in a dinner kind of setting, unless there was some specific thing that they wanted to know about.
Okay.
Related to the university, the economic development specialist, the mayor and his staff, if they were involved, like the deputy mayor. And so
Right.
And superintendent of public of schools for,
Right.
for the local area and the university. We would gather and visit with them and do questions and answers and talk about what we had to offer and assure them that we would be here to be counted on. And so, it would depend on what kind of company, but companies of all stripes, that was the process.
Okay, well, just think of an example. Since you participated in those scenarios, what kind of questions would you get from those people looking at perhaps coming to Muncie? You're the university person. What kind of things do they want to know?
Well, they wanted to know something about if it was an industrial company, and often they were
Right.
those kinds. They wanted to know what kind of training, what kind of workforce development
Okay.
we could offer for them. For some of them, for their employees, they wanted to know something about our curriculum because spouses or the individuals involved. They wanted to know if we had MBA programs because if they brought technical kinds of programs to the community, they wanted to build their leadership, and so those kinds of programs were very important.
Okay. Now I want to swing this in an entirely different way and ask you to talk, as I said, at the outset of our conversation, if you're free to comment in a general, non-specific way at this point in time, about Ball State's interest in helping to develop what we, for many years, have called the East Campus area. Because I know you've been spending a lot of time on that, and I'd like to get some of that on the record when you could tell me a bit about that.
Well, it's pretty early in the process.
Right.
But we have, for a lot of years, focused on expanding the campus, meeting the academic building needs of our students and faculty. And it's no different than many, many other campuses across the country, because I've visited maybe 20, 25.
Okay.
And there's a realization that in faculty recruitment, in student recruitment, and to retain people in various communities, that it's not enough just to have nice academic buildings. The setting, the quality of life that presents itself around a campus is really important. And so there have been a number of movements. Now, some have been driven by high crime areas that have developed around the university. And there have been deaths that were wake-up calls for institutions that said, hey, we got to move this from wherever it is in the priority scheme up to the top of the list. Other campuses, students complain that it's a suitcase college, that there's not enough to do in the out-of-class time period. And so they've struggled to offer constructive out-of-class kinds of experiences. I think one of the things that is happening now, and maybe I'm conscious of this because I've been working on it, and maybe no one else thinks this is all that important. You kind of get yourself immersed in this. But there is, I think, a move toward new urbanism and smart growth and sustainability. And why is it that everyone has to drive their car everywhere? And I know, for instance, at this institution, I've been involved in discussions over the years, and typically what happens is people work on something that is.
You can read this thing.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
We're in good shape.
They are, making suggestions to improve our environmental impact that are things that are clearly at the margin, that have very little, they're popular kinds of things to do, but there's nearly nothing more important that we could do than get people out of their cars and keep them moving as much as they could. And that's one of the reasons why sustainability and new urbanism is becoming more than just a fad. We're returning to something that we knew. A new urban opportunity does not exist around this campus.
No, right.
Not for students. So the features are walkability, bikeability, using a bike for transportation other than just recreation. So that's something that we don't offer here at all. There's only one neighborhood around the campus that it's a very nice neighborhood, but it wouldn't be considered urban. That adds value. I think a sociological study that somebody maybe has done, if not, what they could do, is what has happened around university campuses as properties have converted from home ownership to absentee ownership,
rentals,
to new developments that drew students to another locale within the town, and then watch the neighborhood as it goes downhill to finally get to a place where it was crime-ridden. And when you back up to say, how did this ever happen? It's just like the deindustrialization.
It is. That's right.
While no one was. That's not like no one. While everyone was watching.
Right.
This simply occurred, and on this campus, with this knowledge, we actually have a chance to reverse some of this stuff before it really gets bad, and that would accrue to everybody's benefit.
As you've traveled to look at other campuses, could you give me an example, just for our conversation today, of one university where this has really worked well?
And I mean, this isn't anything. If you got involved in the literature on this,
Yeah.
you'll find out the University of Pennsylvania is touted as the model.
Okay.
They started on this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's why, I mean, now it's, most people think it happened overnight.
No.
Ohio State is also a
Oh, okay.
model.
Huh.
Um,
How's Ohio State? I mean, with their location with High Street and what's happened on High Street? Huh.
And the major investment they've made,
Yeah.
plus other plans they've had. Cincinnati is another tremendous success story.
Huh.
They have converted lots of area. They have, I think, something like 9 zones that they're active in.
Wow.
And some of them are
Yeah.
halfway complete. If you knew that what their plan was and you saw what they were doing,
Right.
and you knew how it was going to come out, you'd really be impressed. Other areas are completely finished and add a lot of value to the campus.
But Tom, Cincinnati is a real urban campus. Penn is a real urban campus.
Yeah.
Ohio State is to some degree. How would you fit Ball State into that model?
Well, you know, I thought when I went to see these places, I was told when I got into this, you've got to go see this. And
Right.
I thought, well, you know, maybe this isn't going to be all that helpful, but I'll
Uh-huh.
go and learn what
Right.
I can. They've done so much. But those campuses are actually so large
Yeah.
that they touch the community
Yeah.
in lots of different places.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And it isn't that much different than where we touch.
Uh-huh.
Even though, I mean, if this campus was 5 times the size, in the village as an example, we'd
Mhm.
still only touch it 1 time.
Right. Yeah.
And so they just, at Cincinnati, for instance, they have 9 or so areas they're looking at.
Mhm.
At University of Pennsylvania, they have many more touch points.
Right.
But it actually turns out to be a pretty good model for us.
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Hmm.
Now, it's not that we're gonna build, as they have done, a high-end condo development
Mhm.
right across the street from the campus that's something like 7 floors.
Right. Yeah.
But we need to build a different kind of housing than that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the techniques, a lot of the planning is pretty much the same stuff.
Does the retail end of this follow the housing or the other way around?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah.
That is one of the great conundrums
Yeah.
of all this. You have to have the people to drive the retail.
Mhm.
Now, it depends on what kind of retail you have.
Yeah.
You want to have a drugstore. You want to have a
Right.
grocery store.
Yeah. Right.
You want to have a movie theater.
Yeah,
You
right.
want to have a hotel. You
Yeah.
want to have all these things. And many of
Yeah.
them have, and they all have kind of an interdependency.
Yeah. Right.
But you got to have the people.
Yeah.
So that is, now, that's different. Now, that part,
Mhm.
the answer to that question is different in Columbus, in Ohio, and in Philadelphia
Yeah.
than it is in Muncie.
Yeah. Right.
That's the difference. But what you're building, for instance, I was at William and Mary.
Mhm.
William and Mary has.
Williamsburg, Virginia.
Right, now there's a community, and
Yeah.
this goes back to the other conversation. There is a community that has been working on making their community really nice and attractive to people
Yeah,
for
right.
years.
Yeah. Right.
Well, right next to William and Mary campus, they have a 300-acre development. They are creating what they call Newtown.
Huh.
And it was a green field.
Yeah.
And, outside of the fact that there are no mature trees in there, which is a bother to me, they are developing something that is pretty spectacular. A good mix of housing
Mhm.
stock, commercial area, a retail area and commercial,
Mhm.
so they have a business incubator section.
Hmm.
I guess it's not exactly, they have commercial space for businesses
Mhm.
that they plan to embrace and
Hmm.
develop. So that's a pretty spectacular example.
Yeah.
Akron is, the Knight Foundation in Akron gave $10 million to to the University of Akron, provided that they would work with the city
Hmm.
in a joint development.
Is that a downtown campus?
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's in the city campus.
Right, yeah, more so than we are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, they have some real challenges, that different challenges than we have. Western Michigan,
Yeah, well, I've seen that, yeah.
and,
Yeah.
I mean, Western Michigan there are some differences in that the housing stock where the students used to live
Mhm.
was really pretty good housing stock.
Yeah.
Nice,
Yep.
nice
Yeah.
size homes.
Right.
Okay, I mean, different than
Yeah.
those bungalows.
Yeah.
And then all of the new housing that's been developed for students seemed like 2 miles out, a lot further than we have out here.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So students are going out there and they're leaving these other places, and it's the same story as we
Yeah.
have here.
Exactly.
And if they had been able to, if they had known the future, like everybody, they would have done some things differently. At Kent State, Kent State is out in a place where students say to the people that run the place, "There's nothing to do out here in this field."
Right, yeah.
And they're kind of struggling to try to create some commerce that
Yeah.
would be supportive of students.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I've seen some great examples at lots of places, and this, it's not that it's just an awful lot of hard work.
Well,
It's very
yeah,
difficult in our
it-
situation.
It's a window of opportunity.
Yeah, it is. So
Okay.
who knows how it'll turn out.
Well, hopefully for the good, because I think it could have incredible payoff as far as the university community is concerned, no doubt of that.
Well, write this down. The greatest impact that Ball State University could have on the environment is developing a
Yeah.
new urban community that is very successful and that changes the
Mhm.
the way people think about.
Yeah,
If you need something, you don't have to go to Walmart.
right.
In your car.
Right. Yeah, as we all do too many times. One final question to kind of sum a lot of this up. And I've alluded to this once or twice during the course of our conversation. When I came here in the late 1960s, the big industrial plants were Muncie's largest employers. Now Ball State is. How do you think Ball State, being the largest employer in this community, changes the university's responsibility to the community?
I suppose we have more responsibility
Okay.
than before. I guess I've always thought that we tried to shoulder, our share,
Mhm.
but there are fewer people to share it with.
Right.
So, I mean, I feel pretty good about our attitude about changing the industrial mix, or
Okay.
it isn't going to be an industrial mix, but the economic mix
Right,
in
right.
the community. I think
Right.
we have a lot of people here who are focused on trying to add value.
Okay.
I think it needs to be pretty clearly understood, though, that this is countercultural. I mean, this is the people who have taken jobs here.
Yeah.
Never had it within their training to do what people want us to do.
Yeah.
And a number of us would like to have us do.
Yeah.
So people they have to understand that.
Mhm.
And so it'll be slow.
But the expectations are greater, I think, on the part of the local citizenry as far as the university's role, by contrast with the way that was perceived in the late 1960s.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's fair.
I don't think no one was even thinking about
No.
our adding that kind of value at the time.
No.
It wasn't something we could deliver, and
Yeah.
I mean, I hope even now that people's expectations are not unrealistic,
Mhm.
because with our hardest work and best efforts, this is going to be
Mhm.
a difficult thing.
Yeah, yeah, no question about that. You're trying to change a community that sometimes doesn't appear to me anyway, and probably to you as well, that it really wants to encounter change head on.
Well, I mean, it's more than just, I think, for most people that have jobs here, they never ever thought it was the role of their profession.
Yeah, right.
Makes it even harder.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
who
that's
said
true.
it was their responsibility? Well, that,
It's not in my contract.
yeah,
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
right.
I mean, it was not an expectation.
Yeah. Well, those are all the formal questions I have, but in all of my interviews, I always give my interviewees an opportunity to reflect and add anything that you might like to add at this particular point. So the floor is yours, sir, if there are any other comments you'd like to offer as final concluding comments.
I guess I think, you know, what happens in Muncie is informed by what happens in some other places as well. Indiana is a state
Mhm.
that has, right now, economically, winners and losers. I mean, there are actually two states here. One of them is maybe three. But Indianapolis and that region is one state. The rest of the state, well, I suppose you could say that the region is always a different state.
Right.
And then there's the rest of Indiana.
Mhm.
And the good news is that where there has been the most prosperity, there are lots of individuals who would like to help float
Mhm.
the boats in all
Right.
of Indiana higher. I met yesterday with a fellow that's been active in economic development circles in the state for a number of years, and the point of the conversation was to try to identify additional steps we might take to
Mhm.
contribute to what we've been talking about here
Right.
today. And we were talking about venture capital,
Mhm.
and actually not moaning because there isn't enough. It was deploying what we currently have, which is a whole lot different than it was just 10 years ago in
Yeah.
this state. And we were talking about this group of venture capitalists who were entrepreneurs, were successful, cashed out, and now want to reinvest
Mhm.
in a variety of endeavors. And they're anxious to help Muncie, Indiana.
Mhm.
They're anxious to help Indianapolis. So 10 years ago, you couldn't have gotten together 20 guys
Mhm.
with the capability that these persons have.
Mhm.
And that spills over to other areas. We have in this community an angel investor group
Mhm.
that is willing, ready. Our biggest problem, in my mind, is sufficient deal flow.
Hmm. Okay.
If you consider that the rule of thumb, you go to any venture capital, any economic development guy that's working on the evolution of small businesses,
Mhm.
and they'll tell you that about 3 projects out of about 100 will get to be successful.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, if that's the case,
Yeah.
just think how often you have to have 100 ideas.
Right. It's pretty high risk.
Yeah, well, and so, you know, where is it
Mhm.
that 100, you know, 100 good, or well, 100 even half-baked ideas evolve in a community every year in
Mhm.
order to get 3.
Mhm.
Now, if
Right.
you want to have 6 new businesses start up, you got to have 200 good
Yeah,
ideas.
that's right.
So, I mean, that's something, and, you know, there is precedence for this in
Yeah.
Indiana. How many people can you think of that were inventors during the industrial age here in Muncie?
A lot.
A lot of them.
Yeah. A very significant number. Yeah.
And, I mean, they all weren't just factory workers.
No. No.
So, what we need to do is develop a new group of people just
Mhm.
like those.
Yeah.
And that will happen someplace, and I don't see
Mhm.
why it can't.
Couldn't happen here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your taking the time to chat about these topics.